Hello, good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to this webinar. Just to set the context as others are joining, Regal Unlimited is a boutique firm into leadership development through coaching, coach training and mentoring, and healing and counseling. So in coaching, we do one-to-one and one-to-many, which is systemic team coaching. And in coach training, we do ICF approved program as well as others, including one of our most popular program is Leader as Coach, something that Ruchira speaks of immensely in the book. Uh, you know, what we are unique in the sense that we bring all these three together: coaching, mentoring, and counseling / healing. As part of our effort to popularize pure and classical coaching among primarily the leaders, we have been conducting these webinars. The objective of this webinar is primarily to familiarize this concept with practicing leaders and aspiring coaches, which is, these are our two primary target segments. We have had INSEAD professors coming in speaking on various topics. We have had an expert on emotional intelligence, a topic which is very popular both among leaders as well as among coaches. And also, we had somebody coming and talking about the ICF PCC marker, which is more specific to the ICF coaches. It's a pleasure to invite the celebrity author of this fantastic book, Ruchira Chaudhary. Those of you who have not bought this, I would invite you. Anyone who has an interest in leadership and coaching, this is a must read. And this brings together elements of both leadership and coaching. So Ruchira is an alum of Chicago Both, has extensive work experience both as a corporate leader in the area of mergers and acquisitions, and she's also an executive coach. This book, what I liked about this is there's a lot of cricket and there's a lot of sport. So not just cricket, she speaks about a basketball coach in the US, a game which is very close to my heart. She also speaks about what makes leaders great, like Satya Nadella, to what makes Google great, Project Oxygen, and also she speaks about a framework which is called 4 C's of coaching. We're going to dwell into all this. Uh, the way we have structured this is as also suggested by Ruchira, is we're going to kind of have a brief introduction about the book, Ruchira's journey so far, what prompted her to write this seminal work in coaching initially. After that, we're kind of jump into the Q&A. We have received some question and answers, and we want to make it truly interactive in the true spirit of coaching. Yeah. So without much ado, Ruchira, if you can share what has been your journey so far, both as a leader, as a coach, and what prompted this. And before I pass on the baton, my friends here know that I always say nothing is a coincidence for me. So yesterday I saw there is a tweet, Inc. magazine. There's a tweet saying that the top 5 leadership books, right? Somebody has made a list. The number one book is the $1 Trillion Coach. So technically, it's not even a pure leadership, right? But that is the core of leadership, the way we all see now. And I really hope and pray that this becomes number one and number two in that kind of August list, right? Thanks for this. I know what it takes to write. I'm an aspiring author eternally. So you know this, I shared this with you. But I know what it takes to write something like this. Over to you, Ruchira. Let's start with your
Thank you. Thank you,
Genesis.
Subhash. Firstly, thank you. You've been very, very generous with your compliments. Celebrity author and all that. I don't know about that, but all I'd say is I'm very, very privileged and happy to be here with some like-minded people. Subhash found me on LinkedIn, so kudos to him. And the rest, as I say, is history. So thank you again for the honor. It's a very eclectic and bright set of people on this webinar today. And as I said to Subhash earlier, I'd like to make it interactive and informal because I think one key lesson I learned while writing this book was that you're constantly learning from each other. So let's use this as a forum for you to please go ahead and ask me questions. I'm using an iPad, so I won't be constantly, looking at the chat box. So hopefully Subhash can help me with that. But also to sort of use this as a medium to learn from each other. I don't have all the answers. That's the crux of my book. Coaching is not about having the answers. It's about giving more power to the question than the answer. It's about asking good questions that elicit right or good answers. And that's what good coaching is about. So you've already seen the cover of the book. Let's get you a bit started on what the book is all about. Coaching, the Secret Code to Uncommon Leadership. As Subhash was saying, it takes a lot to write a book. I found out the hard way. Also because when the book was ready and all set to be released, exactly a year ago, we were in the throes of this pandemic, which doesn't seem to end. At least I'm in Bombay now, so I'm back in that same mode. We're back in lockdown mode, as if my world hasn't changed. The book was, I submitted the draft in March last year. And then all the printing presses had shut down and everything had changed. So they didn't actually get to taking this draft and putting it in a manner that could be printed till about August of that year. And then we realized that the world had changed, right? And I needed to truly make this a more relevant book. So I added an afterword. We talked about coaching in times of Corona, virtual coaching, which I had not, by the way, addressed in the book. So I added all of those pieces. And when it was ready to go to print in December, I think it was a lot more contemporary. So that was a journey. Not just writing the book, but putting the cover together also took a long time. I give my poor publishers a very hard time, Penguin. So this is, as you can see, the spaghetti, the knot that is getting untangled. But that wasn't enough. They wouldn't get this part right. And I said, that's not enough. Coaching is not just about entangling. You also help the individual become a better version of himself or herself. So you help untangle and you help them go higher, which is where we got the direction of the arrow right. And then I said, you also help them shine brighter and become a better version of themselves. So that's what the book is about. It's not a book on leadership, right? There are some fantastic books on leadership. It doesn't give you the code to leadership. It's not a book about coaching either. It's not a book targeted at executive coaches. It's a book about uncommon leadership. And what do I mean by that? It's a journey from being a good leader to an extraordinary leader, or should I say a leader to a leader coach, right? In my mind, coaching is that key or the code that unlocks this uncommon leadership. Uncommon leaders, the way I've defined them in the book, are those that understand that great leadership or good leadership is not just about building your empires. It's also about the journey. It's also about taking people along in that journey. It's about elevating people and their teams as they elevate themselves and their organizations. It's about helping others grow. It's about maximizing the success of others. And the way I've defined coaching is about maximizing the performance and potential of the people that you lead. That's what the book is about. And yes, there's a lot of cricket. There's a lot of performing arts. There's a lot of stories from my own life. I didn't want it to be a sort of a boring academic journal. And I've got to be honest, I did read a lot of books on coaching, including The $1 Trillion Coach, which I truly love, and I borrowed from it extensively. But I couldn't find that one book that assimilated all of these learnings, and just in terms of frameworks, but sort of portrayed it in a manner that was digestible, that was palatable, that was an interesting read, right? Because if I just have a framework after another framework, being the boring academic that I am, people switch off. If you truly want people to imbibe this or make this a new model of leadership, they need to believe in it. You need to make them see that coaching comes in so many different ways. And it's just almost like a life skill, right? It's not about leading big teams or small teams. It's about lifting others. It's about shining the light on others. And when you shine that light on others, you shine brighter. And to me, that's the core message of the book. That's my monologue, but please ask me questions and I'll tell you whatever you need to know.
Subhash, you're on mute. Subhash, you're on mute.
Thanks, Karan. I was saying there's a lot of beauty and art in this also, and thanks for untangling this element. Now, for the benefit of the leaders and other professionals who are on the call, What also this book has done is there are so many great resources, like Ruchira just mentioned about $1 trillion coach. There are some TED talks, and so there is a lot of resources that we can bookmark and go back. So this actually becomes a good referral, and it's not boring, typical an academic exercise. I agree. Uh, I also like the way you spoke about it's about questions, and also it's about uncommon leadership, right? Uh, Also the being, for us, when we get into the coach training, we speak about becoming a coach to being a coach, which is also, I think a leader can operate from a state of being only from that position of a coach. So, and I'm also looking at my additional screen here to pick up some of the topics from the group. uh, what was your biggest lesson, Ruchira, writing this book on coaching?
That I didn't have all the answers. um, if you don't mind, Subhash, I just saw a question pop up on my iPad which says, "What made you become a coach?" So let me do that in sequence, and then we'll get to that, if that's okay with you, right? What inspired you to become a coach? So I think I have to be very honest. I'm in a gathering, so as to say, the virtual world of people that are, some of them, a few are truly very well qualified and experienced coaches. So let me say this as humbly as I can. I didn't think that I would be a coach. It wasn't something I was seeking to do. I had done a mid-career MBA from the University of Chicago, the Booth School of Business. My expertise was in post-merger integration. I do a lot of organization design, transformation kind of work. That classic right brain and left brain. I had a specialization in game theory and strategy. And I thought, armed with my new skills, I would change the world. I would seamlessly marry business priorities to people priorities. And along this journey, as I was doing a lot of M&A work and org design work, I would counsel a lot of leaders. I had great conversations and people actually listened to me. So that part was right. But I didn't see myself as a coach because I honestly didn't know what coaching was all about, right? To me, and that's, I think often a lot of people say that to me. Coaching evokes images of something that's very amorphous and fluid and not very tangible. And to be honest, I was no exception. I didn't really know what I didn't know. So as I was going along with my life, doing my consulting projects in-house or as an advisor, I was with this on a large financial services firm, which had a great reputation but a very toxic work culture. And I was in a situation where there was complete vacuum of any kind of enablement or coaching. It was a hard ride. And I got a call from the University of Chicago, the Booth School of Business. And they said, "Would you like to come and be our resident executive coach for our senior level leaders?" And that sort of, that was that moment when you say, "But I don't know what coaching is. I can't coach." And they said, "But you're certified." And, but over the years, I'd amassed a bunch of certifications. They just came my way. I never thought I'd do much with it. It helped me, but I didn't think much of it. And so they said, "Listen, you're having a hard time. This is my alma mater. I studied there and I occasionally would go for guest lectures." They said, you're not really enjoying yourself. Come on board. Do this as an experiment." So the answer to someone's question, it wasn't by design, it was serendipity. Went to the University of Chicago, the Booth School of Business, started coaching what they call the Accelerated Development Program for their C-level executives. And what worked for me, I suppose, was, since I'd gone to the same business school, as I said to you, I had the right brain and the left brain both working. I was able to assimilate the classroom learnings to a leader's personal trials and tribulations. And I managed to get that bit right. And so what started as an experiment in leadership coaching then became such a fulfilling experience. And I lived in Singapore, little tiny village. I'm exaggerating, but yeah, everybody knows everybody. So other business schools found out and they said, "Oh, can you come and coach for us?" And that started my coaching journey. And then eventually the book happened when I moved to India 3 years ago.
If I may just add here, for the benefit of the group, my perspective on it, right or wrong, is that coaching, I refer this to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. I feel, they say when the student is ready, the master manifests. For
Right.
me, I think coaching as a process, it's not the coach, definitely. I think coaching comes to our lives some way or the other, makes a backdoor entry seemingly, then we connect the dots backwards, as Steve Jobs said famously.
I like the backdoor entry. I'm going to use it for my next session.
There is somebody from your, this question also is something I had. So my questions can come later.
Yeah, that's okay. No, we'll address them all, I promise.
One of your fellow alum, he's asking, who is the best uncommon leader coach that Ruchirak has come across and why?
There are many, but I'm biased, of course. So I'm going to talk about the two that, many, but the feature in my book, Satya Nadella.
Yeah.
There's an entire case study on Microsoft. I was completely blown away by how he rebuilt it. He's also an alum. So obviously I was biased. I've had the pleasure of meeting him in person many years ago. And even then he radiated so much energy. And when he talked about culture, and he talked a lot about what he did to change Microsoft, AI, cloud computing, how he completely fixed a broken Microsoft. But what really I found powerful, and he talks a lot about that in Hit Refresh, another book I borrowed a lot from, since we're giving each other resources. He says that strategies can come and go, but if you don't fix the organization's culture, there's not very much you can do. And he also talked about how he was disappointed that when he walked into the organization, he realized that less than 5% of the managers were actually engaged in any kind of enablement or coaching. And I am truly impressed with now. It was then and it's now. When you talk to any Microsoft employee, a manager, or a leader, they will all embody the same framework. They call it the management excellence framework. Model, coach, care. So be the role model that you are, coach your people, enable them, and care for them. So empathy becomes a very important, and they get evaluated on these parameters as well. So they've truly embedded that. It's not about saying this is how you should be, but you also get measured on it. So they've integrated that into the organization's DNA. So Satya Nadella. I also like Sheryl Sandberg a lot. She's on the cover of my book, and I found her to be a truly uncommon leader to interact with. She doesn't know me. I met her very, very briefly many years ago, and I moderated a session for the University of Chicago, Lean-In and University of Chicago, and I just sent her an email asking her if she would be happy to review my book. And believe it or not, she said she'd give it a shot, and she did. So I think it's completely uncommon. I don't know if too many leaders who would do that for you.
Yeah, very true. It's just the habit of the willingness to give, right? Yeah. So
Exactly.
Empathy. This is a topic which is very popular among the coaches for sure, but also I'm sure a lot of leaders are looking at it, and Satya's name do crop up, right?
Yeah.
This whole shift from I to V or IQ to EQ is the way we kind of try to simplify it. Can it actually be acquired, emotional intelligence? Can it be learned?
Yeah. So, in fact, I've talked about it in one of the chapters, because often when you drill deeper into why, despite having so much data, research, and anecdotal evidence, most managers are not great coaches. We know that. Of course, the reasons are many, but one of the things that often will come to the fore, you'll meet people in a corridor and say, he just doesn't have it in them, or he or she just can't get it right, doesn't have the EQ. Now, what does that really mean, right? The emotional quotient. And we sort of dismiss it by saying that you're either born with it or you're not, right? But here's the thing. Your brain is like this, it's plastic, they say. Over research, they're saying it's malleable. You can change, but you need to be willing to change. And so almost everything can change. But the challenge is not so much that it can't be done. It's often that there is a blind spot. Firstly, we don't think we are not coaching. When we are telling people what to do, we think we are actually coaching them.
Yeah.
That is, so people, often you will find managers saying that they're great coaches, when in reality, that's very far from the truth. Because in their world, when you tell somebody, hey, I was successful, I did this right, they think they're actually doing you a favor by saying, you follow my footsteps. But they're creating a mini me, and that's not coaching. Coaching is not telling, it's asking, right? So that's one. So that's a blind spot. If you get around that blind spot and you actually understand that this is not coaching, you have to be willing to change. So there is hope. Yes, EQ can be developed, but before we rejoice too much, you have to be willing to change. It's hard work. It takes a lot of time, but the results, there is enough research to show it can be done.
Sure. So I pick up Rajesh's question. Hi, Rajesh. So he's referring to this book by Erin Mayab on rules on Netflix with the Netflix
Yeah.
she's co-authored. So any thought on the uncommon practices that the company has? Uncommon people, sorry, people practices.
I don't know enough. In fact, by the time this book was out in print, a lot of people said you should look at Netflix, and I did. But I'm truly amazed by the culture that they built at Netflix, and it embodies a lot of what I'm talking about: empowering people, elevating them, giving them the space, cutting them slack. The ability to innovate and do things differently comes when you give people safe spaces,
Yes.
which is what Netflix, I think, has done a really, really great job of. And if it wasn't for the fact that I was so biased about Satya and Microsoft, I, I did consider that as a case study. But my book is 356 pages long. And as my publisher said, we had commissioned it for 70,000 words. It's a lakh 20. So I think there was no room.
Okay. Thanks for that tip. I mean, there is a book in every one of us, at least one book in every one of us. 70,000 seem to be the sweet spot, right? Publish a book.
He said, give me 70 to 80,000 and anyways, we'll chop it and make it 50, 60. Like in Hindi, he was like, we'll cut it out. But to my shock, they barely took anything away. And then, of course, as I said to you, because of the crisis, we added another chapter. Then that's something what I did. If there are people who've read the book, I've added what I call a checklist at the end. So the concepts in each chapter are repeated right at the end.
Yes.
And they sort of tried to tell me, oh, you're just repeating what's already there. I said, no, believe me, I know what it takes to keep going back to a chapter to try and find it. And I wanted to make it easy for people. If you've learned a concept, you've learned a framework that resonates with you, you shouldn't have to look for it. It's right there at the end. So that added another 2 pages.
So there's one more question from Bharat. Hi, Bharat. So he's asking, kind of look into the future. How do you think role of coaching evolves for people personally and in the workplace over the next 3 to 5 years?
To me, a lot of people ask me this, should you think of leaders as coaches? I'm going to be very candid. My whole premise of this book is you can't be a great leader without being a coach.
Right.
Coaching and leadership are not two separate disciplines. Coaching has to be a subset of what a good leader does.
Right.
And the command and control style, the style of telling people, while there is acknowledgement that it's changing, these behaviors are still very deep rooted. Whenever there's stress in the system, whenever things are not going right, we often resort to that same style where we constantly tell people what to do. And it's a hard one. So increasingly, we have to reimagine or think about this alternative model of leadership where a manager or a leader does not have all the answers. You have to leverage the collective intelligence of your people. You have to surround yourself with experts, people who know things perhaps slightly better than you do, and you recognize that. The beauty is that you assimilate all these learnings, whether it's a corona crisis, which some women leaders have done a fantastic job of. Your job as a leader is to ask the right questions to get those answers. Your job as a leader is to shine the light on these people. It's to give them the exposure, it's to give them the opportunity. It's to really build the next line of leaders. That's what great leadership is. And so coaching and leadership is really one and the same thing. And we no longer can say that you should also be a coach, because you can't be a good leader without being a good coach.
So that actually gives me, a good platform to ask the next question from Saurabh. So Saurabh is saying typically we tend to focus on the top of the top line for the top of the organization, top management for coaching, whereas it's the functional leaders who deliver. So any uncommon leadership of the guys who are somewhere at the functional level.
So I think what he means is that we focus on providing executive coaches to this top line.
Correct.
Which is typically the norm and will probably stay that way. I've now increasingly worked with organizations where they also have people down the line, what we call middle management, having access to coaches, and that's fantastic. But the whole premise of the book is that, and as is the $1 trillion coach that you talked about, Subhash, the best coach for every team is the leader. Okay. We can't possibly be outsourcing coaching. It's not feasible. It's not it's expensive and it can't be done. So that is why we need to create a culture or embed a culture of coaching that cascades from top down. That every leader has to be responsible for building the next line of leaders. It's the leaders of today that have to build the leaders of tomorrow, which means you have to coach, enable, and build these people. Make them the best versions of themselves, make them capable, give them more clarity, make them more self-aware, and give them the confidence to go further. That's what good leadership is about. And of course, executive coaches will exist. People like you and me, we want to make a living, don't we? I'm not suggesting that these are substitutes, but I'm simply suggesting that our efforts will supplement that of the leader. We come in short bursts. These are short, focused bursts where you help iron out either a challenge or you come in at certain junctures in the organization. And the fact of the matter is, as he rightly said, it's typically the people at the top that have access to these coaches. And that reality may not change for a long time. Organizations have limited resources. They'll bring in people like us for the senior level. And yes, they should be extending it to functional, but that's not a call we can take. But what we can do is to ensure that every leader consciously emulates this mindset that coaching begins with me, that I'm responsible for empowering, elevating, and enabling the next line of leaders.
Which also brings me one of the key points that I want to really cover for the benefit of the group is, we kind of, when I say we, some of the professional coaches that we all form the community, we focus on the ICF framework or EMCC framework. And there's a lot of focus on the GROW model, thanks to Coaching for Performance. Now, I saw your definition of coaching includes performance and potential. So performance is what we have seen in Sir John Whitmore's book, whereas potential is more aligned with the ICF definition. So I want to really spend a few minutes on that 4C model that you speak of in the book at a macro level.
Sure. So again, I think just to put more context to it, my 4C model is not a model that is not a framework that is practically helping you coach. The model takes a couple of steps back. It talks about why you should coach. What should coaching do for somebody? What should you focus on? And the genesis of that is actually quite simple. As I start, and this also answers your earlier question, Subhash. I'm glad I waited a bit. My biggest challenge was write a book on coaching and then not being able to find out what coaching really delivers, right? I looked at every website, the ICF, and I looked at several confederations. I'm certified in the European one, by the way. And everything says that it unleashes potential. It helps you build ROI on your people, untaps something hidden reservoirs of talent, all of those great stuff that we use. I've used that. But what does that really mean? Think about it. If I was trying to tell it to a layperson who doesn't understand coaching, what does it mean? It unleashes talent, hidden potential, etc. So I wanted to really make it tangible. I wanted to really talk about what these outcomes are. And as I started to sift through all this literature in HR journals, in coaching journals, I couldn't find the answer, to be honest. And I found the inspiration in a fairly unlikely source. I was with my son and he was watching this Kung Fu Panda for the 5th or 10th time, I don't know. And I started looking at it and then I actually paid attention to it and I thought it was very interesting. So I took some lessons from there and then I amalgamated it with a whole bunch of other things. And then I started writing this chapter, which talks about what does the 4Cs model, what does coaching deliver? And I really distilled it to 4 things, 5 really. I call it the 4C plus model. The 4 Cs, the first one is clarity. So what does coaching do for you? When you start coaching somebody, when you become that sounding board, that non-judgmental individual, you're giving the person clarity. The answer lies in the person's inside our own heads. But it's a coach that gives you the ability to see this a lot more clearly, right? A little bit like the book's cover. You're helping untangle those knots. As leaders, often we have so much going on. There's so much noise in our heads that these thoughts become big knots. And so what somebody like a coach does is help untangle those knots. So you can weave distinct patterns, right? And they become a lot easier to comprehend. The second piece is what we call popularly self-awareness. I call it consciousness because I wanted to call it 4 C's. So second C is consciousness. So I've talked a lot about what What do you mean by consciousness? It's about looking into the horizon. It's truly understanding who you are. And when you don't have enough awareness, then seek that awareness from others. So I talk a lot about that consciousness model, and often the coach is, I think, biggest contribution is helping you with those blind spots. Clearly they're blind spots because they're not visible to you. The third one is capability, right? What does a coach do? I think, to me, the biggest sort of tenet is capability. Capability comes in many ways. It's new skills, of course, but it's also about giving people the understanding that you can invent your own career ladder, you can do things differently, and you need a coach to help you validate a lot of that's going on inside your head, make you more capable. And the last piece is confidence. I talk a lot about confidence, especially in the context of women leaders, because I think confidence is about the self-belief that propels action. And often, despite being talented, despite our successes, despite having achieved so much, all of us get plagued by self-doubt. And you need that non-judgmental, that completely unbiased individual who helps you go to the next level, who helps fuel that confidence in you. So confidence, clarity, consciousness, and capability. And it's on a foundation of culture. If the culture in the organization or doesn't fuel that coaching, then unfortunately these cornerstones won't come together in a manner that they should.
That's one thing I have seen in my limited experience. Culture is at the foundation of this whole thing, right? Only the organization which have in them that affinity towards coaching can embrace coaching.
Absolutely.
Sangeeta, any additional question on ROI? Sangeeta's question is, how would you define ROI of coaching? I'll wait for her to respond there. On the 4C, one thing that really caught my attention was the ladder that you speak of, Ruchira. And this is so interesting that whenever a lot of leaders connect with us for career coaching, one question that comes up is, typically we look at going up the ladder. Is it the right ladder or the right wall, for example, right?
Correct.
We never pause for a perspective to check whether am I leaning the ladder against the right wall. So what is that that you speak of about the ladder in the 4C context?
I think my sort of take on it is very simple. We've always been conditioned by society or otherwise that we believe vertical growth is the right way. You do something, you do a great job, you continue to do the same thing. Somehow when you deviate from that path or that ladder, ostensibly that ladder, we feel that we're not on our way to being successful. And so that definition of success needs to change. And often you need that coach to help you get there. So I've talked about some examples, and I wanted them to be interesting examples. So I've talked about this woman who started out, I think she wanted to be a vet. So she enrolled in the veterinary school and then realized that she got through, but couldn't make it because she had an allergy to dog hair, couldn't make it. Then she said, oh, by the way, I'm great at cooking, so let me try and be a chef. So she tried to become a chef. And she also already realized, this is 70s, realized very quickly that she was into Chinese food, and she realized those kitchens are really run by men more often than not. And they didn't take very kindly to having a woman chef. She just didn't have it in her. And she lost that battle pretty quickly. But and she was struggling a bit. And in one day, she was in the restaurant helping out with the waiting staff. And they were running short of what they call mixologists at the bar. So the restaurant manager said, can you make that guy a drink? Right. In so many words, when I picked it up from the magazine, I sanitized it a bit for the book. And she said, she didn't know enough about it, but she was very curious, right? So curiosity, I think, was one of the biggest tenets. So she went there, and this is a very unconventional career. We're talking about the late 70s. And she says, I made this drink, and I just did something innovative because I read a bit about it. And the patron was so impressed with that drink that he said it was the best drink he'd ever had. And so, needless to say, the restaurant manager said, I would love you to run the bar. And the rest, as I say, is history. She is India's one of the better known mixologists now. And she runs her own school where she teaches people, young people how to do that, because it's a profession that's not, you don't know much about. Most people frown upon it, but it's truly, becoming a big thing. And being a woman in the late 70s to do this I thought was path-breaking. So I didn't pick up an example which was, of somebody becoming a prime minister or a Formula One driver. I thought, let's just take somebody who was like you and me. But I was completely amazed at her grit and her passion and her desire to change. And so there are a couple of other examples in the book, but you'll have to read the book for that.
Yeah, I read that part, how she became yeah. Neeti, I think Neeti is joining us from South Korea. She asked, how quickly can one move from getting entangled to untangling? Very, very deep question.
It's very profound, I admit. It depends how entangled you are, how deep how badly you're knotted up in your head. There is no right or wrong. There's no time dimension, but I would say that if you want to untangle, it shall happen. If you're committed to changing, if you're committed to finding the path to move forward, as Subhash said very eloquently, the road will clear up. Things will happen. I think the first step is willingness. And often there is no willingness to change.
I'll also add, it's surprising, we have this, Neeti, in the realm of coaching, we speak about context and content. Content is like this, the Saas Bahu serials, that story doesn't move. So the mind is very comfortable to play in that space. That's how the mind is wired. So, when that willingness is so powerful, unless, we don't realize that we are very comfortable being in that zone. But to come out of it is like moving to a different orbit for a rocket. Yeah, but I agree. It's that willingness.
So
Mini,
there are two questions from.
Yeah. So Mini's question is, would you please talk about
So
Yamba? I hope I got the pronunciation right, and popcorn coaching in the context of today's remote/hybrid working model.
Yeah, so popcorn coaching, it was interesting. I didn't know it existed. I was surprised by the librarian here at the American High Commission here in Mumbai. She was helping me with the research, and it was developed. It's for the benefit of everybody else who has read the book. Popcorn coaching is a term was coined by this physicist, Dr. Hicks. He was trying to build a coaching model for his team of doctors. And he coined the term because he said his favorite activity growing up as a kid was watching his grandmother make popcorn, in that kadai, in that vessel, not the standard microwave one, where each kernel would pop and you wouldn't really know whether it would turn out perfectly or it would still remain, in the oil as a seed. So he said, coaching moments are akin to that. You have to seize the right one. You never know when it will come along. You might be in a car park and you might meet somebody, and this could be a moment where you could give somebody positive feedback or ask them about their day. You could be seated next to somebody on a flight who happens to be from the organization. The moments are many. They come in many shapes and many forms, but the key is to recognize them and seize them. And he also says some of these moments are about asking, but often these moments could also be about telling. Sometimes you need to give guidance and sometimes you need to ask. You need to be able to distinguish from each one moment from the another. So that's the genesis of the popcorn moments. Now, the virtual world, the virtual reality has completely changed that rules of the game, right? Now we look at each other through a screen, and it was hard enough to coach and hard enough to be able to pick up every nuance when you were in person. Trying to do this to a screen is clearly not an easy task. My simple advice is be more present, be more available. Choose your medium. Not every single conversation with a team member has to be a video call. You have to appreciate everybody's reality. Some of us have smaller spaces. Some of us have barking dogs and cats and young children. It's okay to use a phone call when you don't need to stare into each other's face. Give people the space, appreciate that. Cut them some slack without letting them slack off. So this is also coaching. Coaching is not just having that 30-minute conversation. Coaching is also about recognizing people's reality, which means, there's a very interesting, very nice poem, which is, we're in the same storm, we're not in the same boat. So you and I could have an ocean liner, but somebody else could be struggling with a lifeboat or a canoe. So as a good leader, good coaching is understanding that reality and tweaking your style to that individual's reality. Good coaching is also that when you're when you're having a video call, check in on your people. Don't constantly keep checking on them whether they're doing the job. Trust them, but also start each meeting with check-ins. Try to truly make the time for people. We're all going through not an easy time. So be more empathetic, be kinder to people, be more available, pick up the unsaid and the non-spoken words even through a screen. When you see one person barely speaking, maybe there's a message in there and you can have that conversation one-on-one. That's what I mean by being available, be in the moment, cut people some slack, don't jam their calendars with meetings, and yours as well, be that role model. So you have space and time, to take people along with you. So lots of things in that few sentences.
Thanks for that, Ruchira, because I personally feel that while we are fighting the pandemic with treatment, vaccine, and all the preventive measures, I think the psychological impact, emotional impact of the pandemic is yet to hit us, and I think that can be bigger than the physical disruption that it is causing at all levels. Right?
Absolutely.
So you spoke about empathy. So there's a question: what is the role of empathy and compassion in dealing with VUCA?
Yes.
So anything more you want to add from this? Just
No, I think I pretty much said it, but I think this is a time to be, if there is no better time to be more empathetic. And empathy doesn't mean being nice to people. Let me qualify. You have a business to run, you still have revenue targets. Empathy is about understanding people's reality. It's about putting yourselves in their shoes. It's about appreciating the work that they do, but recognizing that these are unusual times. And you need to be able to customize your leadership style, your coaching style for your team members to bring out the best in them.
Correct. No, that actually, I had the same question. There's a question from Minnie. What are the top 5 traits of a leader coach?
Top 5. Okay, let's see. You have to help me. I might start rambling. Okay. Sure. I think the first thing that through all the research that I saw, was almost each of these people who we define as good leader coaches are givers. They want to give to people. It's something that comes very naturally to them. They won't give at the cost of, whatever, I guess, achieving targets or whatever, or their own. But their natural instinct is to make time for others, to lift others. They truly enjoy that process. There's an experiment by Professor Benjamin Bloom of the University of Chicago in the late 80s, I think, where he talks about how each of the ace performers, people who are stellar performers, when they started out in life, they weren't the most gifted. They weren't the most gifted mathematicians or tennis players or guitarists. The one pattern they found consistent in each of these, now what we call ace performers, is they all had a teacher, a good teacher, a good coach who enjoyed coaching them. Mm-hmm. So a lot of that came from the nurturing, and these nurturers were people who truly enjoyed lifting others. So giving and enjoying coaching, those are the 2 traits that are very, very relevant for a good leader coach. The third thing I've noticed is they're great listeners. It's a very underrated quality. A lot of us are guilty of it, me included. We constantly love listening to our own voice. But the ability to listen to somebody, actively listen without interruptions and assimilate that is a fantastic trait. So I think listening, we talked about it. They're empathetic. They usually understand your reality. They can put themselves in their shoes. And the last bit is they're not afraid to be vulnerable in front of you. What I mean by that is, if they don't have the answers, they will tell you. It's authentic. So back to the whole premise of coaching, asking, not telling. They're not afraid to say they don't have it, they don't know it all, and that they will help you find that answer, or rather, we'll find that answer together.
I hope, Minnie, you get your top 5 traits.
5. I counted 5.
So, that also reminded me on a question that I took. So I want to ask this in 2 parts, Ruchira. One is, how much people are aware of legacy, an important element of their coaching, of their leadership? Do leaders really think of their legacy in a positive way or negative way? Because if they think that I'm going to remember for this 100 years later, 50 years later, they would have been performing very well today, right? So, how many, I mean, based on your interaction with leaders and your research, are people truly aware of it? And based on that, what advice would you give the leaders here that they should consider in terms of legacy? Because that you cover in the why leader as a coach in your book.
Yeah, it's a layered one. It's a complicated argument, and I'll explain why. It's great to talk about legacy. It's great to talk about leaving a lasting impact. Mahatma Gandhi says that, right? A good leader is not somebody who has great followership, but it's about the number of leaders you build, number of leaders you create. And many other leaders have said that in different ways. But not everybody truly wants that legacy or cares for that legacy. Let's be candid. You talk to a private equity professional. I went to the University of Chicago, right? The Booth School of Business. I was 3% of my class. Everybody else was either into hedge funds or private equity. Talk to them about legacy and they'll look at you like, I'm stereotyping here. It's a hard one to explain. Therefore, those that build others, a lot of times it's intrinsic motivation. It's something that they truly believe in. It has to come from within. And for those that don't, we truly need to ensure that the organization systems um, reward them for building others. So then the nuance is slightly different. Often we get great leader coaches because those people genuinely want to build others. They want to leave a legacy behind. It comes to them naturally. They're givers, all of that. But that can't be true of everybody in an organization. So if we truly want to embed a coaching culture, we need to ensure that not only do we give people these coaching skills, but we actually create an environment, an ecosystem where feedback is sought, where people who build others are rewarded, where we celebrate these individuals, where we promote people who show these traits of leadership, not just those that achieve revenues and numbers, right? And that's the larger component of it. So there's intrinsic motivation, back to your legacy, and then there is those that are truly motivated by the rewards, the monetary rewards of it, the promotions that come by being recognized as a leader builder. So yeah, it's a bit layered. I don't know of too many people who will say, "Oh yeah, I want to create a legacy, and that's why I build leaders." It doesn't happen that much.
So I think Nidhi joining us from Singapore. Different countries, cultures, leaders, leadership styles. How do you vary your approach for coaching? Do you customize coaching depending on these parameters?
Yes and no. I mean, I've lived in Singapore for 14 years of my life. Been back in India 22 years. Um, Great leadership is also about great coaching. The only difference is in how people build others. The end goal should still be the same, right? It's about great leadership. It's about lifting. It's about elevating people. The journey can meander a bit. It's the same thing as I said about women leaders. The destination should be the same, but I always say focus on the confidence factor a bit more. When I've coached a lot of leaders in the Middle East, there are some other inhibitions. So you have to work on those inhibitions as you help them get to that path. If you're in Southeast Asia now, I don't want to stereotype either because this is a global world, right? All I'd say is when you coach, you have to be cognizant of the cultural nuances and work within those cultural nuances to help people shine. That's the goal of a good coach. If you're a leader coach and let's say you have come in from a different geography, I would say the onus is on you to truly understand what works and what doesn't work in that culture and try and tweak your style, your leadership style, so that you can assimilate better, right? There are many classic case studies. The book has them as well. There's a Mexican leader who comes to Netherlands, right? And he's trying to put a team together. And every time he puts a proposal forward, everybody raises a hand and says, "Oh, we disagree." And that really shook him up because in his world, you don't oppose the leader, right? Whereas here, the whole premise of working together is that conflict is good, that you can poke holes and yet be respectful of each other. And that's how we roll as leaders. And it took him a while to understand it, but he also understood that they were not being disrespectful. That's it was completely acceptable to do this in a manner where we came together as a team and took consensus decisions. So, very long-winded answer to her question. It's about culture, it's about nuances, it's about tweaking the style and appreciating the differences. But the end goal has to be the same: make the person a better version of himself or herself, make them shine brighter, make them go higher.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for that. There are two related questions on school. So, Bharat is asking, at which point do you foresee coaching being taught at school? Then Rajiv is asking, how do we make this switch from telling to asking? Because in school, we are always taught to answer
Yeah.
questions. How do we make this switch?
No, it's a great question. I don't know whether you by schooling means primary school or business school, but the fact of the matter is we go through our life always being told that we have to have all the answers, that we
Right.
have to shine the brightest. And often this shining the brightest comes at the cost of others.
Correct.
Therefore, this whole concept of taking people along in the journey doesn't come naturally to us, which is why we back to that point about why most managers are not great coaches. It's not a skill that is consciously inculcated. We've never been taught, and now suddenly there is this expectation that along with achieving the numbers and the revenue targets, we also have to build our people. It doesn't come naturally because it's never been an expectation, it's never been taught, and they've never been coached, right? So I think there needs to be, so business schools are already doing that, if that was a question. 20 years ago, what they considered soft subjects, and now people who are in leadership positions say those are perhaps the hardest parts of their job, the softer or the people issues. They're revisiting that. A lot of business schools are integrating what they call leadership program into their curriculums. So it's not just about negotiation skills. They have put in courses like conflict management, having difficult conversations, leading and coaching now have become part of their core curriculum, which was never the case. When I was at business school, these were optional subjects. And by the way, nobody showed up for them. People like me were just sort of flitting around. And when I was teaching this at business school also, till about 5 years ago, it was, I mean, I had an attendance sheet, but half of them didn't show up. And if they didn't show up, there's not very much you could do. It was not a graded course, by the way. But they're changing that narrative because I think there's a growing recognition that business schools give us strategy and negotiation skills and they give us financial metrics, but they don't prepare us for the real world. And the real world is about people. It is about getting along with people. It's about leading them. It's about bringing out the best in them so that you can be successful as a leader and as an organization.
Great. Whether Bharat can clarify, it is business school he was referring to.
Good, I'm glad, because I was a little worried about how to answer the question back to school. I'm not there.
So now there are two related questions from Venkat Raman and Harish. Now, how do you balance that performance and potential? That's another classical question.
Yeah, balance, I'm not sure, but I think more importantly, we need to differentiate that great performance is not always equal to great potential.
Yeah.
And goes back to that question of why we don't have enough leader coaches, is because we've always believed this misplaced notion that someone who's a fabulous performer, a fantastic performer, will automatically morph into this fantastic leader. Look at cricket as an example. The annals of history will show you the best performing sports person or the best batsman is not necessarily the best captain of the ship. Because captaincy or leadership requires a few slightly different skill sets or traits, I should say. And sometimes when we have these super duper performers who have inordinate amount of resources, they are blue-eyed boys or girls, they have everything at their disposal, they don't get nurtured because organizations think, oh, they're so good, they'll be great leaders. But even the best need to be nurtured. If you read Sachin Tendulkar's biography, he said he was not ready to take it on. He didn't know what it entailed to be a leader, and that put a lot of burden on him as a person. He wasn't excited about the captaincy. It was something that was thrust on him and he couldn't refuse, right? So bottom line is promote people, make those people leaders, one who truly wanted, but two, back to his point, is those that show the potential, not just current performance. Potential is future, performance is now. Not the best salesperson will not be the best sales manager. In fact, we lose both. You lose a you lose your salesperson, and you won't have a great manager.
Sure. Great. There's one question on. So I have a question. I don't want to miss that. Something which gets asked in our coach training and mentoring programs. How important is say spirituality slash variance there of philosophy in leadership and coaching?
To be honest, I do not know enough, right? But as I understand spirituality, for me, it's about forming connections. It's about deep relationships. And what is coaching, right? When you help people feel that joy, that deep emotional connect,
Absolutely.
the joy in what they're doing, in the work that they are, when you make it a fulfilling experience for them, when you build them and take them to the next level, it is a form of being spiritual. Spiritualism is not religion. It's
Yeah.
about fulfillment and is forming deeper connections with yourself and with your organization.
Correct.
And that's how I see it. But Subhash, you probably are much better. You probably say this a lot more eloquently than I have. So please do say so.
And sure, no, maybe some other time. I don't want to miss. I hope the attendees are looking at some of the comments Mini has made. The super chicken analogy was one question, but that you covered already. The way we tend to
Briefly, yeah.
briefly.
Yeah.
So, but that book covers it very well. Also quotes this source. Gandhiji's quote, I think, the role of a leader is to create more leaders. Now, there's one bit I don't want to miss. I'm also mindful of the time. Durkha's reminded me building individuals and teams. And now you also speak about the project Oxygen at Google. And I personally feel, right or wrong, that Bill Campbell's biggest contribution to Google is that the whole focus on team. I feel, which they
Yeah.
have continued to till date, right? So, and going back to Durga's question, are there any significant differences in leader coach approach to build teams versus individuals?
Not that I know of. I think you have to use the same focus when you build an individual versus a team. But okay, I stand corrected. You have to when you focus on individuals, you have to play to their unique strengths. That's what makes them shine brighter. When you focus on your teams, you have to do it in a collective fashion. You have to bring them out together, and you have to take a step back to ensure that you build cohesive teams. You build teams that trust each other. You build an ecosystem and environment where positive conflict is encouraged, where people can speak their mind, when you can create safe spaces where people where people are okay to make mistakes,
Sure.
where you tell them upfront that it's okay to fail because you have their back. And that's a kind of team culture that you need to create. So that ecosystem that you create for your teams and for the individual is no different, but you have to create a more cohesive environment so that people can work together and they can trust each other better. When you take that coaching to the one-on-one level, then this is a time you have to truly focus on playing to their unique or their individual strengths. And honestly, a great leader should know what each of his team members, each of his or her team members is great at or not so great at.
Actually, you refer to that project Oxygen, where he says, over two studies, right? The one thing that stood out was my manager is a great coach. That has not changed, right?
That hasn't changed. Yeah.
That is something which is integral to team development.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, there's one thing which I don't want to forget. So this is the link to the book, if at all, Amazon. Karan, if you can, maybe I'll have to copy, right? I'll copy and paste in the chat. It's a must read. This must be on your, on your library. And, I picked up a lot of lessons from that, a lot of resources. I'll keep going back. And I'm, Ruchira, primarily an Audible and Kindle person. But I chose to buy this book even before we connected, thinking that I know there are a lot of things that I want to keep going back, and that is my invitation to all attendees here. Ruchira, once again, thank you for sparing time, sharing this book, and a bigger thanks for bringing together something like this for the benefit of leaders and coaches. There's a lot to go back and reflect. And I also, I'm son of a soldier, so I'm very delighted that it has come from this part of the world, right? And I hope you'll come back with these are times of sequels, right? Some great movies. I hope continue on this.
Yeah, I keep telling all my people in
Passion.
Singapore,
Yeah, so I'm
it's an
sure
India release.
this needs more thing, and I hope. And do you still continue writing on Mint? Earlier you were writing.
Yeah, off and on. Now, HBR, hopefully the next article is going to come out. So honestly, can't write a book and the man Mint. So
Yeah,
that
I
was a big
understand.
pause.
I
But
understand.
I did tell them, you should be the first to print my review. It's because of Mint I got the book. So, they saw my column in the Mint and
Yeah.
said this could be a book. But thank you very much. I am truly, truly, as I said, privileged to be with such a amazing bunch of people. It's not every day that I have so many questions. I'm fielding them from all directions, and they're all very, very deep, profound questions, and all very incisive. So thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for logging in and joining and make it so powerful conversation. And coaching is a deep conversation. Yeah, thank you for that. And once again,
Thank you.
best wishes for a bestseller list for this book. Right?
Thank you.
Aspiring
Look
author
forward to that.
speaking. Sure.
Thank you.
God bless. Yeah, Hari. Yeah.
I think one of the learners asked whether this book is available on script.
Yeah, audible version. Yeah.
It will be, but they take about 4 months from the date of the release. So I think another couple of months it should be on.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ruchira.
Thanks, Karan. Thanks for all the work behind the
Thank you,
scenes. Goodbye. Thank you.